Hello friends, this video on our environment part 3 is brought to you by examfear.com. No more fear from exam. So now let us talk about the classification of the biotic components. Like as I said, when I talk about the biotic components, that is the living components of ecosystem. So the living organisms are vast. We really have a very vast variety of living organisms, starting from the minute microorganisms like bacteria, fungi, viruses, to the huge whales or elephants or lions or tigers. So there is a great variation. So we have a good variety of the aquatic life, aquatic plants and animals. Similarly, we have a hell lot variety of terrestrial animals as well as plants. So the biotic components were further classified. So the living organisms, that is the biotic components, are classified into 3 groups based on how they derive their food from environment. Because as I said, in this lesson, our focus is how organisms depend on each other for their survival. So when I talk of survival, food becomes a very important factor, because we know that none of us will be able to survive without food, because food is something which actually provides us energy, and without energy we will not be able to do anything. Right? So now let us see. So we will see that there are many animals which derive their food in many different ways. So depending upon their way of obtaining food, they are broadly classified into 3 types. So what are they? Producers, consumers, and decomposers. So these are the 3 classifications. So we will now study about each of these type of living organisms in detail one by one. So let us see who are producers and who are consumers and who are decomposers. Now with the names, I am sure you are able to guess who are each of them. Producers are those who produce stuffs. Consumers are those who consume them. And decomposers are those which actually decompose things. That means which break down things. So let us see who are they. So let us start with producers. So these are the organisms which prepare their own food. That is why they are called producers, because they are the ones who are producing the food. So examples are the green plants and the blue-green algae. Needless to say that the green plants produce food by the method of photosynthesis. So we have discussed about the process of photosynthesis in detail in one of the previous lessons, I guess in the lesson on life processes. So there we have seen that how in presence of sunlight, the green plants will convert carbon dioxide and water into glucose, which is then stored inside the plants in the form of starch. So that starch actually acts as food for the plants. So by the process of photosynthesis, these green plants will be able to produce their own food. And similarly, blue-green algae, which are also known as cyanobacteria, as you can see in this picture, blue-green algae, they are also producers because they can also perform photosynthesis and prepare their own food. Let us now look at consumers. What are consumers? Organisms which depend on producers either directly or indirectly. So basically the term consumer means those who consume things, those who eat things. So producers are the ones who will produce food. Consumers are the one who will eat that food. Right? So in a rough term. So consumers actually depend on the producers for food either directly or indirectly. So what do we mean by directly and indirectly? When I say that a consumer depends upon the producer directly, that means the consumer feeds consumer actually feed on the producer itself. For example, let us take the example of say goat. So goat, what is the food for goat? Plants. So goat directly feeds on plants. So we can say that goat is dependent on plant for its food directly, because it is directly consuming plants. Now when I say depending on producers indirectly, what do I mean by indirect dependence? For example, let us consider lion. Now a goat feeds on the plants. But do you think that a lion feeds on plants? No. So what does a lion feed upon? A lion feeds on maybe goat or deer or other animals. Now these animals in turn feeds on plants. So if there are no plants, then lions will also not get food, because if there are no plants, goats will not get food. So there will be no goats. If there are no goats, so lion will also not get food. So even the lion is not directly depending on plants for food, but it is dependent on animals which eat plants. So we can say that lion is indirectly dependent on plants for its food. So these kind of organisms which depend on plants for their food, either directly or indirectly, are called consumers. So examples: animals, insects, birds, humans. For example, here you can see a tiger, a human being also. For example, many of us, we feed on plants as well. For example, the vegetarian people, they generally feed, they eat fruits or vegetables, right? So they are directly dependent on plants. But there are some people who are non-vegetarian, that is they feed, that is they eat meat as well. They eat meat, they eat fish, and these organisms in turn depends upon plants. So even human beings are also consumers, that is we also directly or indirectly depend on plants. Now in these consumers, again we have a variety of animals. So that is why a further classification was done, because as I said, here only you see that there are two things. Some animals will depend directly on plants, whereas some animals will depend indirectly. So based on the way animals are dependent on plants for their food, they were further classified into 4 types. The first type was herbivores, next carnivores, then omnivores, and finally parasites. So these are the 4 classifications of consumers, that is these are the 4 types of consumers. So let us now discuss about each of these types in detail. So what are herbivores? Herbivores is derived from the word herb. Herb, what is herb? Herb is a small plant, right? So organisms which feed directly on producers, that is plants. So those organisms which are directly dependent on plants are called herbivores. Examples: goat, cow, buffalo, horse. So all these animals, they directly feed on plants. So that is why they are also consumers, but they are directly dependent on plants, so they are herbivores. The second one is carnivores. So I think you would have guessed it. So organisms which feed on herbivores. So the organisms, that means carnivores, are indirectly dependent on plants. So these organisms, examples would be lion, tiger. So see, any of the animals which you see above, like a lion or a tiger can eat up a cow, they can eat up a buffalo, they can eat up a goat, a deer. So they actually feed on the herbivores. So that is why they are carnivores. The third type is omnivores. What does the word omnivore means? Organisms which feed on both plants and animals. That means they will eat plants as well, and they will eat animals as well. Can you give me an example of an omnivore? Exactly. All of us, the human beings. Many of us are, however, herbivores, that is there are many human beings who does not feed on anything else other than plants, so they are herbivores. But human beings in general, since inside human beings we have many who feed on flesh or who eat flesh, so that is why we consider that human beings are capable of eating both plants as well as animals, so they are termed as omnivores. So not only human beings, we have other animals also which are omnivores. For example, cat, rat, monkey. So they also feed upon both plants and animals. And the last one is the parasites. So what are parasites? So these are the organisms that live on or in another organism and derives food from that organism. We have spoken about parasites in detail in one of our lessons in class 9th, Why Do We Fall Ill, if you remember. So what are these parasites? They live inside the body of some other organism and obtain its food from that organism. So think of an example. The tapeworms in human intestine. You would have heard very frequently that people get food poisoning happens to people when you eat something outside, or when you eat something junk, something spicy, something which is not cooked properly. So your stomach tends to get upset, your food is not digested properly, so some of the other problems happen. Sometimes there is some infection inside your stomach. Now why does all these things happen? That's because sometimes there are other organisms which are residing in your intestine. For example, tapeworms are one of the most common examples. It is seen that inside the human intestine, the tapeworm makes its own house. So here you can see in the picture, there is a party going on inside your intestine and you are suffering, unfortunately, right? So these tapeworms, how do they survive? They survive by taking food from our body. So that means whatever amount of food which we eat, they snatch away a small portion of that food, and that is how they survive. Now that doesn't mean that they do not harm our body. So when they are snatching away a portion of our food, that itself means that they are harming our body. However, although they harm the host, their intention is not to kill the host as they survive on host. So what is host? So here parasite is the organism which lives inside another organism, and host is the organism inside whose body that parasite is staying. For example, in this example, tapeworms are the parasites and the human intestine is the host. That is, the human being is the host. So now, even though they are snatching away food from our body, so in a way they are harming us, right? They are snatching away our nutrients. But they do not want us to die, because if that human being dies, the worm will also, the tapeworm will also stop getting its food, and eventually the tapeworm will also die. So intentionally they do not want that the host should die, because they get their food from the host. However, because of their method of eating, they end up harming the host. So these are the 4 categories of consumers: herbivores, which directly depend on plants; carnivores, which depend on animals which feed on plants; omnivores, which eat both plants and animals; and parasites, which live inside another organism and obtain its food from that organism. Clear? Okay. So we talked about the 2 types, that is the producers and the consumers. Now what was the last type of the biotic component? It was decomposers. So what are decomposers? These are the organisms which feed on dead bodies of producers and consumers. So now, what will happen when organisms die? So now their dead bodies, if there are no decomposers, what would happen? The dead bodies of animals, plants, microorganisms, so everything will keep on accumulating, right? So there will be no way that they will go somewhere. So there needs to be a method by which those dead bodies can be consumed. So that is why we have these organisms called decomposers. So they eat up the dead bodies of producers and consumers. So they eat dead and decomposed things, right? So decomposers play a very important role in the environment, right? Some of the examples of decomposers would include bacteria and fungi, right? So these microorganisms, bacteria and fungi, they have the capability to break down the complex bodies of animals or plants into simpler and simpler substances. So this is how they obtain nutrition for themselves, and at the same time the body gets decomposed, right? So these were the 3 categories of the biotic components of an ecosystem. Thank you. Please visit www.examfear.com to watch more videos, attempt free online test, get free study material, find tutors and mentors. Thank you once again.